actually Galileo. And so the name of our camera. And we call him Galileo not because of the scientist. Galileo was also built the first telescope. So, and obviously a fantastic name for a telescope, right? But we actually named it after my co-founder Christine's dog, Galileo.
Welcome to PEP, the Protect Europe podcast, where we interview founders and investors building the technology that protects Europe's values, way of life, and infrastructure. Join myself and Rue Pinto as we interview Johannes, founder CEO of Diffraqtion, winner of 1 million euros from Slush 2025. This company is rewriting the rules of space. Join us and dive deeper. Johannes, thank you very much for joining the podcast. And it's really good to have you here on the back of your fantastic win at Slush, the tech conference, where, you won the pitch competition, which is a hard ask because there's a lot of companies in that mix. And we wanted to take the time to kind of capture this conversation with special guests. So that's always good on this side in terms of Rue, who knows 5,000 times more about satellites than I ever will. And we thought we'd structure it so that you kind of walk through your deck, and also we get to pepper you with questions. So if people missed your presentation at Slush, this is actually a deeper dive than they would have been able to get because you're under less time pressures. So big welcome.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much, Colin. Very happy to be here, and on Thanksgiving Day, but even better of an occasion to talk about space and quantum.
Yeah, exactly. And let's start with the brand. So, Diffraqtion, How did you come up with the name? What does it mean? Where did that come from? Naming a company is actually one of the ridiculously silly jobs, but effectively, it makes such a big impact.
It does, really. There's a lot of power in the name. The company itself was called SensorQ Technologies, and we had applied for about pretty much exactly 1 year ago. My co-founder Saikat and I were decided to apply for a DARPA SBIR, Direct Phase 2, and we needed to have, website, emails, the whole shebang. So I was in that mode of, okay, SensorQ sounds like nothing. And also there was like a little, when I Googled it, there was like a little kind of fridge that kept fruits safe. And it was also called SensorQ. And I thought, okay, let's, find a better name for it. And we came up, I had a lot of ideas around the different types of names. But then Diffraqtion, I remember it was one of the names that really popped out because, and I'll tell you why, but when I I was with Saikat at a conference in Arizona at the Center for Quantum Networks, and we walked across the street. It was like a very busy street. I walked across, and then we were in the middle of this intersection. And then I told him the name. I told him, Saikat, what do you think about Diffraqtion? And he stopped. He said, Johannes, this is amazing. This is the best name ever. And I said, Saikat, I share your enthusiasm, but we have to cross the street because there were all these cars coming. So then we knew this was the name. Why he was so excited about it was because the two things we kind of do is the see further, which you see right here. The seeing further comes from that fundamental limit of your eyes. So when you go to the optometrist, the last letter you can read, that's your eye's diffraction limit. And this technology that Saikat developed can actually see beyond the diffraction limit. And this is in physics normally impossible to do. So anybody who's done a degree in physics knows, the diffraction limit is kind of the limit of how far I can see, right? So like the last letter. And we actually break that limit. So that's the first. And the second reason is the way we do it is the elements that are in the camera itself are also diffractive elements. So it's kind of the technology itself and the result are both diffraction. So it made a lot of sense.
So I love that. And it's a way better story than my friend who set up a consultancy business in the UK back in the day. It dates the story because there was no internet, right? So he rings up company's house, which is what you had to do to register a company. He's got a long list of companies that he basically wants to register and try the name of. And he goes through the list and he fails and fails and fails and fails. They're all taken. And he's like got 20 names and he can't find a company name out of any of them. And the guy's like, so what do you want to call it? And he's like, HNI Consulting. And they're like, sure, that's available. And he's like, and the guy's like, what does it stand for? He goes, have no idea.
That's actually a good one.
So his entire business for the next 25 years was have no idea consulting, HNI consulting. And it's only because he couldn't think of another name to register, and all the other ones had gone. So yours is way better.
Yeah. Well, that's very on brand. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through. So we've got the brand, we've got the see further, think faster type approach, right? Now, what's next?
Right. The domain we're in is the physical AI space. So I don't know if you saw Jensen Huang's presentation in January at the CES, where he had this chart that he had, the early days of AI. Actually, I started my career a little bit on the left-hand side here. So back in 2000 or so, wrote my thesis in AI, and since then kind of stuck with this whole curve. We saw agentic AI pop up and become really dominant in the last few years. Gen AI since the 2019-ish or so, and then physical AI is the next frontier for robotics and vision. This is physical AI is every device that interacts with the physical environment, and that can be a drone, it could be a car, it can be a robot, or it could be actually an autonomous spacecraft or satellite. So that's the domain of physical AI. And I know that in my career, I spend a lot of time in intelligent vision. And I know that intelligent vision is still very hard, and humans are still way better than machines. So these billions of devices that will come into the market will require a breakthrough in intelligent vision.
You mean we can't just train them on cat videos like last time?
Well, that's the funny story. So actually, Galileo, so the name of our camera, which I'll go into a minute, is called Galileo. And we call him Galileo not because of the scientist. Galileo was also built the first telescope. So, there's obviously a fantastic name for a telescope, right? But we actually named it after my co-founder Christine's dog, Galileo. Why I named it like this is because I was trying to explain the technology. So we were like trying to explain it to a friend who was a venture capitalist. And I told him, well, imagine you take this camera and you point it at a dog, right? And then the dog, it lights up, right? So that the back lights up. And now imagine the dog is, I'm now in the middle of Boston, right? Let's say he's like in the middle of Massachusetts, like miles away. You point the camera and then the camera will still see the dog back there. So the camera basically is trained on cats and dogs because that's how you used to train AI. And the dog in the room was Galileo. So then we said, hey, we should just name it after the dog because it can recognize the dog. So anyways, but so indeed, we do train the camera on cat and dog videos, but also on other pictures like satellites, drones, and so on. So that's still a very prevalent way to train AI vision, right? So actually, you're not far off at all.
Goodness. Okay. It was a joke, but clearly all good jokes kind of end up true in that aspect.
Yeah. It is totally fundamental to
And well done her for naming her dog Galileo. That is a great dog name, right? I have a dog that's named after a cookie / biscuit, right? Because it's black and white. So, I think I should go back and kind of rename him after famous scientists.
Actually, we even made him into a mission patch. I'm not sure you can see that, but there's a little mission patch. And this is Galileo himself. So it's a dog. It's an Australian Shepherd. And he's, capturing the world. So it's like a globe. And it says Galileo 1 is the mission. And actually, the logo is, I don't know if you know the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO. That's basically one of the agencies of the DoD in the US that is responsible for satellites in space and Earth observation and space observation. And they have mission patches. So they have a mission patch called NROL. And they said nothing is beyond our reach. They had a little globe and an octopus. It's kind of menacing. And the octopus has one arm over Russia, and it says nothing is beyond our reach. It's a very ominous logo, but then we replaced it with the dog. The dog is catching the ball and says nothing is beyond our reach. So a little background story on the mission patch too.
And I can't resist, Johannes. I mean, since we are on the dogs, the back of your camera has the picture of a dog, and that's Galileo, I suppose.
Yes, correct. Yeah, you saw the website. The backside is actually...
If you look at the back of the camera, there is that dog looking at you very intently. I loved it.
Exactly. Yeah, we have very different mission patches. I can show you maybe later, but I generated that with AI, obviously, and had him in a spacesuit. He was like looking in orbit. So we had a lot of very funny versions of mission patches till we concluded that. But yeah, he's our company mascot. He's a chief dog officer.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So let's move on from dogs, even though I'd love to make the whole podcast about the dog.
Well, we stay close to dogs, actually. So when you take a picture, let's say of a dog in this case, but if you take a picture, you go through a little pinhole and the light comes through a pinhole and hits a film in the back, right? So this is kind of how photography has been going on since the 1800s. What we do here is, how AI works today is very similar to how we used to do AI back then, or photography back then. And this thing that we have really switched is, instead of having a film, which is a photoreactive material, we have now a sensor which is converting that into pixels, right? So the output is a JPEG, some sort of image data. And then this data is now processed and run with a GPU that kind of runs AI on top of that, right? So this is how we do virtually all of AI today, right, in the visual space. So Seikart's research was around quantum mechanics. So he came from the quantum information theory. And the theory, what he found is that when you do what this is called direct imaging, so if you directly observe the light and capture it, you lose most of the information. Actually, you lose 95% of the information of the photon that the photon was trying to tell you. So, the universe trying to tell you something, you ignore most of it, and then you run on 5% of the information and run your AI on top of that. And that happens because of something that's introduced called shot noise, but it goes back to, some of you might know Heisenberg uncertainty, or maybe you've heard the double slit experiment, right? That the light behaves like a particle and wave. Or maybe Schrödinger's cat is dead and alive, right? To go back to the cats and dogs, right? So when you observe something, you disturb it. That's a fundamental quantum mechanical thing that's happening. It's weird, but it happens. And it's very well documented. And when you take pictures, you lose information. So what Seikart thought about is like, all right, if I take an image of something, I lose the information. So how do I now, instead of taking an image, extract information from the photon without disturbing the light, right? So this is the fundamental question he asked. And that's where the whole technology came from. Now, a little analogy I like to use is also the eye. So your eye, when we think about the eye, when I was taught in school how the eye works, it's the eye as a camera. It takes images and sends it to your brain, and then your brain processes them. But actually, lots of research in recent years has shown that the eye is not just a stupid camera that takes images and sends it. So actually, the eye, independently of the brain, has intelligence. And in the back of your retina, you have neurons that fire, or not neurons, but retinal ganglion cells that fire like neurons. And they react independently of the brain to shapes and movement that you can see. So if you ever sit somewhere and then, something fell and you instinctively grabbed it, that was your eye doing the thinking for you, not the brain. The brain then, afterwards takes over and says, oh, what did I look at, right? So what is the threat that I'm looking at? So this is a very interesting analogy of how the eye works. And that's why we took the eye to put it into make an edge AI device similar to how the eye operates, directly in the photonic element. And I'll show you a little bit of video here, if I may, which would be
Sure.
the video which shows how the whole thing works. And I hope the sound works too.
The human eye is a masterpiece of evolution, vast, intelligent, and brilliantly complex. The retina doesn't just capture images, it quickly reacts to shapes and movement, triggering split-second responses faster than the brain. Diffraction's technology can light like the retina, achieving 20 times the resolution and 1,000 times the speed of a conventional camera, delivering the world's sharpest machine vision, superpowering tiny satellites at a fraction of the cost.
So yeah, that hopefully gives a little bit of a context of how this works. So the camera Galileo, now going back to the Galileo name of the camera, replaces your camera and your GPU that you would normally have in your edge device. So let's say in your robot or your plane, your drone, and you can see 20 times beyond the diffraction limit, right? So you can see 20 letters down. And because what you saw in the video, the light is being processed by these plates, that whole thing happens at speed of light, which is many magnitudes faster than a GPU or VPU would need to operate, because GPUs don't operate at the speed of light. They operate electronically, and transistors need to flip and lose time. Well, you're much faster, you have much lower energy consumption, and you can also see further as a nice added benefit. And that's where our logo comes from. we should see further, think faster. Now, the trick, so why does this work, right? So the trick is that instead of you directly observing the light and then processing, we just flip the script and we process the light as it comes to us. And at the end, we just observe the outcome. So that allows us to extract almost all of the information from the light that the photon gives us. And the way we do it is, you saw it in the video, these plates and these elements in the back, they can process the light in the right way for us to extract the information from that light. And that's you can see here, if you, for example, take it and you ask a question. In this case, the question we asked was, is there one light source or two light sources coming at me? Now, on the left-hand side, we took a picture with the best camera you can buy. So, it's the kind of camera you will put in a satellite, and then you would take, $50,000, and then you would take an image at the highest resolution you can imagine. And you see this blurry star, right? So this is the diffraction limit of that telescope that you have seen. And now you go on the right and you have the same telescope, but you put our camera in the back, and now you can detect at 25 times more separation, there was another star next to it. And this was a paper published at Optica in earlier this year. About detecting separate stars, or let's say light sources that came through and that we could capture. And the whole research, so this is kind of the culmination of, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was sponsored the last 7 years by at my co-founder's lab, so at Saikat's lab in University of Arizona and University of Maryland, by NASA and DARPA. So there was quite a few millions of dollars that flew into that research and, doing the experiment, doing the theory. And kind of the culmination of the IP is the software. So basically the algorithm behind how do I even process light in the right way? And then also how do I extract this information and how do I build the hardware behind? So it's a culmination of software and hardware together into a photonic processor that extracts this resolution.
And it's super, super interesting in terms of, again, processing the light at the different stages as it goes through, for want of a better word, those plates.
Yeah.
I think that there's a really, I actually was listening to a podcast about fusion generators at the weekend. And again, it was around that, analyzing different shots as they take place or in real time. And there's something very similar here around the processing speeds that you need to achieve to basically do that sort of check.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I first, interestingly, so all of us who joined the company didn't know, except obviously Saikat, but we all didn't know that this is a possibility. Like, I didn't know you could do that. And because, it's not something that's been taught today because it's just a fundamental limit we thought exists. And we always thought, of course, I need to process an image electronically, right? So, I didn't know I had another option to do it. So this was quite enlightening to say, literally, to say, how do I just rethink completely how to do AI or image processing at all, right? So this was quite a big difference. And even cooler, actually. So when you double click on this, what you can do, on the left-hand side, you see something like, you see a Python code. So this is, for example, how I usually would operate with something. I would import some libraries, like a PyTorch or so. I would take some files. And in this case, I'm taking, like, say, an image database from satellites. And I would import a diffraction library. And normally what I create is I create something like this as a neural network. If you saw in the video, right, what you just saw is these plates that the light comes through and disperses. And this is actually very similar to here one layer of a neural network. And this is actually exactly what's happening. So all of that stuff goes down into the neural network, into the layers of the neural network. And each plate is basically one layer. So you can translate all these weights into this basically matrix here. And at the end, the output is basically a readout. So at the end, we read the information out. So the light's already processed and it told us, okay, I saw a cat or I saw a dog, right? And let's say number 6 in this case this is a satellite in this case, right? So 6 is a satellite. Now it will tell you, yes, you just saw a satellite, right? So it will light up and I will read out and say, I just saw, let's say, a Russian communication satellite. And that's not the way how I can train it. I can put multiple models in. I can run multiple models at the same time. And then I can scan the environment and say, I'm looking at a cat, a dog, a car, a satellite, a drone, right? So multiple use cases. And I can reprogram this camera on the fly, even when it's in orbit. Yeah, and this is how it competes. If you're thinking a little bit about the two dimensions, right? So vertical is see further, horizontal is think faster. So vertical is I'm looking at an object, which is kind of the drone. I'm not sure if you guys caught the Ukrainian attack on the Russian Air Force, where they took trucks and then took dozens of drones out and just blew up a good percentage of the Russian Air Force. And these drones, the size of these drones, if you want to see a drone like that with the lens, a 50 millimeter lens, which is kind of normal for this scenario, the furthest you can see it is about 130 meters with the highest resolution Sony camera. So if the drone comes fast at you, you have about 3 seconds to react to that drone, right? Now, with Galileo, we could see that at 2.4 kilometers, which gives you now minutes to react to that drone instead of
very different reaction speeds and times.
Yes. So this is just the distance you can see it. And then on the calculation, because the whole thing happens at speed of light, we are in the domain of microseconds instead of milliseconds. So we, at this point, we can react over 1,000 times faster to what's going on. And that's, if you ever saw these robots that kind of walk in the street, right? And then, or the cleaning robots, and then they see you, they have to stop a few meters in advance, and then you have to walk around them so they can continue, right? So this is a very slow reaction time that exists today for robots, right? Robots really bad at reaction time. Drones also, autonomously speaking, don't have a fantastic reaction time either. So when you're going at high speed, you want to be able to react quickly. That's exactly what this camera allows you to do. And that's basically compared to the best processor. You take like an NVIDIA, like a edge computer, or you take a Halo VPU, it's called Visual Processing Unit, and a Sony camera, and you will still be 1,000 times slower than what we do. Yeah, and you can imagine now, I mean, when I explain this to people, then everybody comes up with some cool use cases, right? You say, well, you could do this, you could do that. So we kind of went from left to right, and it's a bit of a counterintuitive approach of why we chose to go from left to right. But you can do space, which people would say is probably difficult to do because it's space, right? We have then air defense use cases, right? And Golden Dome, drones that we just talked about. You can also build a security camera with it, or go in industrial automation, robotics, and autonomous driving. So we have a bit of a sequence here. We start in space, and then we move to the right as the camera matures. And this is the entire visual AI market of like a $90 billion with 15% annual growth. So it's a very massively growing, very fast growing market. Now, why we start in space, what people ask is, it's not because it's easy to get into space, it's because the thing that you're doing in space is actually easier. The imaging that you do is easy. And the imaging in space is kind of interesting. So you have two things that work against you, which is things are very fast and things are very small and dim, right? So you don't get a lot of light and things are very fast. So normal imaging actually completely sucks in that space, right? So if you want to take an image of something at orbital reentry speeds, you see basically this, which is kind of a array. So you don't really capture, you cannot really see what is it that's being launched, what is that satellite that is now moving, right? It's all going way too fast for you. And it's also way too small, right? It's a very small object. Well, we see further, we can think faster, right? So we solve the problem. We can easily see things moving at orbital reentry speeds. And we can think faster, so we can see things that move at those speeds too, and that are very dim. So the nice background is that if you look up, the background is black, right? So it's black with dots. And that's exactly where our camera excels. An easy scene, small things that move very fast. So this is satellites, or if you point down, then you're looking at, let's say, cars or objects, or you might be looking at missiles, airplanes, drones, right? So everything that's coming in the earth or in the atmosphere. And these other use cases are extremely promising, but the scenes are more complicated. And that's why we start on the left and move to the right, because the camera itself.
I think it's super important to start with what is easier for you, but insanely hard for someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then you clearly differentiate yourself in the market. You force a choice, not a comparison with potential competitors. And it also makes it easier, particularly in this early stage company. I appreciate you've taken in a ton of money so far, DARPA, NASA, etc. But it's clear an easier mission for that core team, right? We're not going to take over the world by basically doing all of these things today, right? That's a series of acts that come in the future. Our first act is we are going to basically make it easy for satellites to see and detect foreign objects, whether that's spacecraft or basically an unfriendly neighbor coming near us. And we do this better than anyone else because.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to kind of the beachhead, right? So the beachhead is space domain awareness and Earth observation. So these are a bit different use cases, but the cool thing is that the satellite here and actually that satellite, and sadly today I don't have him with me, Galileo, the model that I had on stage in Helsinki, he actually got a little bit destroyed because I had him in my backpack. And then I think he rattled too much over a week, so he got a bit squished. So the satellite, we have to repair it. So we're printing a new one. But the satellite is actually quite small. It's about this. I had it on Slush on stage too. It's kind of like 2-3 water bottles big. And this satellite is actually the most powerful Earth observation satellite today, right? So you put him into orbit, it can see you from space, which to me is bonkers for a lens that is this big, like 10 centimeters. And what you can do now with this is you can do two things. So one, you can do space domain awareness, which means you can now detect, like you mentioned earlier, your neighbor, or your, might be a friendly neighbor, might be an unfriendly neighbor, but you can see what other satellites are around you, right? What are they doing? And are they doing something malicious or not, right? Is there any sort of activity that's happening that is endangering your assets or your satellites in space? And you can do that from the ground, which is kind of the first thing we do, is a ground-based system that can see satellites that are very small from the ground. And then later on, space-based, because there's some advantages of you being in orbit next to the orbit of other satellites. And that keeps your assets in space safe. Very crucial, because your entire communications, we have something Starlink, Star Shield, right? So a lot of also military capabilities are there. Your Earth observation, ISR capabilities are there. And the first thing an adversary would do in a case of any sort of warfare would be to try to take out your eyes in the sky, right? That's the first thing you want to do, and that's already what has happened in the past. I mean, we have seen Russia do that to NATO and US assets in space. There's daily hacking, spoofing activities, and major attacks on space assets to get your eyes of the sky blind so that you can move on the ground without being detected as much. So that's a major threat that we're trying to counteract here. And then Earth observation, obviously, when you point the camera down now, let's say you're in the field and you want to know what's going on right around you. So today, there's a few issues with that. One, you don't have a lot of satellites in space because they're very expensive. And these satellites don't give you a lot of information, because even when they're up in space and take images, they're very contested, right? So let's say you are in the field, a soldier in the field. Now you have agencies, you have special operations, you have all kinds of geopolitical activities that would require you, or would take time of that big satellite, right? So the satellite is not just looking at you in the field, it's looking at very many strategic areas. And there's lots of agencies, lots of parties that actually fight for having time on these telescopes, right, in space. So ultimately, you don't really get a lot of intelligence from a satellite yourself if you're like in the field. That's why we fly drones around, right? But the way to solve it is to have a lot of these guys in space. And that's kind of what works for us, is that in space, things get exponentially more expensive. So you have, let's say, $100 million satellite, which would normally cost you to have like a 2-meter lens in space, right? So it's a big lens. Only, Maxar and a couple others have these kinds of capabilities to even build something that big. And it'll probably run them something like $100 million to get that thing into space. And the Galileo that you saw cost you about 200 times less than that. So for a fraction of the cost, you can get a CubeSat satellite up in space and achieve the same orbital area coverage, right? So you have the same resolution, which is 30 centimeter per pixel, and you have the same area coverage too that the big one has. And if you go even bigger, right, this is the biggest, baddest telescope you can get. This is like a KH that the NRO that I mentioned earlier had first put into space many decades ago and then gifted it to NASA. And that's the size of the Hubble telescope. that can do something in the area of 10, 15 centimeters or so, just by extrapolating from the size of the camera itself or the lens. And we can achieve the same with just a couple $1,000,000. So just because of the factor that our lens is a 30 centimeter lens, which is pretty standard in space, like, I mean, Rui, you know it also very well, but there's a lot of Planet and there's many other providers who have this kind of lens in like a 50-kilogram satellite, right, which is pretty easy to achieve. And in fact, all satellites in space, so if you have every single military and commercial high resolution satellite, so anything better than 30 centimeters, there's only 35. I mean, the exact number is classified, right? So, but it's about 35. And this includes US, NATO, Russia, China, India, right? So every force and all commercial satellites together, there's only about 35. They're probably in the ballpark of above $20 billion for all of them together. We could double them with diffraction by about $30 million, which is kind of our Series A. And this is also around the time between our Series A, Series B in 2031. So with the current launch, we would have more satellites in space for Earth observation than everyone in the world combined.
Sounds like a very good evil genius plan. We're just going to be bigger than everyone else. Just a quick question. Array Labs, I don't know if they are in this area or not. I remember reading a deep dive on them a year or so ago, and they kind of seem to do the kind of vision across a bunch of satellites. Is that similar? Do you know them?
Yeah, so in space you can do a couple things how to increase resolution, right? So the one way to do it, there's multiple techniques that help you utilize a smaller aperture, right? A smaller lens. So one technique to do that, which is also kind of what's behind ISI and SAR, is that you combine the aperture of multiple smaller satellites that are looking at the same thing, and then you synthesize the data, and together you amplify that resolution, right? So that's one way to increase resolution. And there's a couple players who do that. Honestly, you can also do it you could even do it with your existing constellation of satellites if they were positioned correctly, right? It's also a matter of positioning. But, if you do it, it's a pretty easy trick to play, right? You have multiple apertures, you aim at the same point, you need a lot of timing, but then you can increase resolution. And SAR and ISI kind of also use the same principle. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is you fly lower. Albedo, for example, they had these very low Earth orbits, so VLEO orbit, that's about 200 kilometers instead of 500, which is LEO, which is where we operate. So obviously when you're much, much nearer, now your aperture can become smaller with the same resolution. And that's why they had an alternative satellite here that could achieve 10 centimeter per pixel. Interesting, the downside of VLEO is that it's a very finicky environment. There's a lot of drag to deal with, so you need a lot of a bigger satellite to compensate. You need a lot of energy to compensate for that, and a lot of good astrodynamics to compensate for you being dragged back. And so the jury's out there if this really works. I mean, they did launch a satellite, but they pivoted away from Earth observation. Now, actually, they built only the vehicle, so you can buy the bus and the vehicle itself and put other payloads in. So apparently there was more worthwhile for them. But yeah, this is, let's say, two ways how you can do it. These two ways, the thing is, we can apply the same trick, which means if we can go to VLEO too, which means our satellite will become at some point, cell phone sized and can see you from space, right? Or you have multiple of the small satellites as an interconnect, and then you can also amplify that resolution. So yeah, both of these tricks are the same, but the main difference is the camera itself. So as long as you do the mistake of taking a picture, you lose the game, right? You're always stuck to this diffraction limit. Only if you apply this approach where you completely ignore the diffraction limit, that's where you get this resolution. So I guess that's maybe a way how to think about that.
If I may, Johannes, that's great. And I love the fact that you're starting with space on your previous slide, because you answered already a couple of my questions. So, why didn't you start putting a camera in a robot head? And, if it doesn't work, you change it overnight.
Yeah.
Space is hard, like the current head of the Space Force said. But the question in my head is, there are things in space. I mean, the key is the camera and the photonic plates that you have. It's even more than the processing. You should, or I suspect you worry about pointing jitter, thermal expansion, sun blinding, noise calibration. So the question is in two parts. First, the icing on the cake here is, when do you fly this, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes time to fly, and if it doesn't work, and I hope it does, but it may not,
Yeah.
you want to have version 2 of Galileo out there flying. So when do you intend to fly it, and what keeps you awake at night on your risk scale of the technology, not even the market? Because clearly, if this works, it's almost self-explanatory, at least for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we actually do is like go one level below, and we put actually a telescope in the ground to demonstrate what we do in space. And before we shoot it to space, to your point, the way how you make it better is by having it obviously near you so you can replace it, right? And the first product we built and we just demoed at the Space Force at Colorado Springs last week is exactly that, which is a ground-based camera that is doing space domain awareness with the ground telescope. And that already allows us to iron out a lot of basically those issues before it goes up. Now, for the space-based version, it only makes sense to send something to space if you cannot do that from the Earth, right? So for space domain awareness, obviously, if you can see particular objects from the Earth, then there's no point sending it to space, right? And there's kind of two limitations to you seeing things from the Earth to space. One is that, to your point earlier, was daylight, right? Or basically you have other light coming in. Now, that means that at daytime you cannot really see satellites. Now, this camera actually has a very cool byproduct, which is that the dynamic range is insanely large, like orders of magnitude larger. Actually, our first product is, and the main application that we have initially is actually all around that space of daytime tracking and coronagraph. So it actually happens to be the best coronagraph that you can produce because of the way that you block out the lights and you block out things that you don't want to see. So the first applications are actually all around daytime and coronagraph. Now, let's say what we are covering is, can we cover most of the daytime, right? And then anything that we cannot put and we cannot see at day, then put that into space to fill the gap of intelligence that we don't have, right? But we're pretty confident that a lot of that can be solved already with ground-based telescopes. So the delta to space will be pretty small. And in space, we will only need to put things if there is a very good economical reason to do so, right? And there we work with also the Space Force, other agencies that think about what is it worth for you to have this sort of intelligence. And there is a lot of budget, but not infinite, right? You have to be very conscious about minimizing the cost for each of these cameras. So to your other question for risk, what keeps me up? So the main thing that is the question mark is, of course, the camera itself, right? So how good can the camera get? How do we engineer it the best way that it still retains a very high resolution, so there's not too much noise introduced by it, but it's also reprogrammable enough and it's flexible enough to have different use cases, right? And this is an engineering trade-off, right? We have to think about what's the best use cases versus the best conservation of plates and other photonic elements, right? How do we read out the data? How do we post-process the data? So if the camera works the way how we expect it, so we know the science works. Now it's a matter of engineering that. But if that works out the right way, then we could achieve these results. And then I'm a little bit less worried about the actual launch of it, right? I mean, launching things to space has become relatively easy. Mark, who's in our team, has launched dozens of satellites already. So he literally always tells me, give me something, I'll launch it. I don't care what it is. So he's able to that part is the easy part. The biggest part is really getting that camera right. And then the other things that you mentioned, so pointing accuracy obviously is extremely important for any kind of Earth observation satellite or space domain. So there, you're quite limited to only the particular types of manufacturers that can give you this kind of insane accuracy that you need. On a thermal side, actually, the good byproduct is that this doesn't really consume any energy. So both on the energy and the post-processing side, there's very little that's going on, which means that this makes that the thermal issue becomes practically non-existent for, as opposed to normal camera even. So that's a good. Yeah, I would say it's probably between one, let's say the pointing accuracy and the loss in space, and then the camera capabilities itself, right? These are the two big areas where we're thinking about, or I guess that keeps me up at night on the technical side at least. Yeah.
Lovely. I like it. And you answered a couple of other questions along the way. That's a little bit boring. I cannot get to talk a lot if it goes like that, Colin.
Sorry. Go ahead, please. Sorry, but long-winded answers. I know I'm answering around the point, I guess, but that's
No. That's really good. One thing, do you worry about the calibrating the camera and the plates? I mean, you already answered one question. I can reprogram it, and that's great,
yeah.
right? I don't know up to what extent you're dependent. If you have just the basic hardware, you can just upload a new version that fixes a little bit of the jitter or refocus the camera. I have seen, but
Yeah.
do you worry about calibrating it, for example? I have nightmares about
Yeah.
calibrating on comms payloads.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, calibration is always a big issue in optical systems, right? The good thing is, I mean, honestly, we have probably the world's best team in doing this. We have Christine, my CTO, she a co-founder. She has built all kinds of optical devices for all kinds of.
Actually, go to the team slide.
Oh yeah,
right?
sorry, I
Because
have
again,
introduced.
no,
Yeah.
just because again, this is like my top investor tip to founders. The team slide is really important, but what this slide never tells you is the relationships between the people, right? Because it showcases title, background, logos, but ultimately any investor is investing in not just the quality of one individual, but the quality of the team.
Yeah.
So I love it. Like, for example, if I've invested in an Israeli company, it's like, yeah, we've served together for the last 10 years in this unit. And that's why we're doing this business together. That's super simple. So talk through the team, but then talk through the relationships with the team. Like, where did you connect with each other? How long have you worked with each other? Because that is also super important. That never comes through in the slide.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Saikat and I met at MIT. So I worked there after I did my dual degree there at MIT. I worked as a researcher there for another year or 1.5 years. And in that time, I worked at the Center for Quantum Networks that Saikat founded. He is, I'd met him at different events throughout, and I got connected to him also through my PI at MIT too. And at one of these events, Saikat told me, I was inquiring more about his work, and then he told me he's looking for aliens, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. What do you mean you're looking for aliens? I put this camera. And then he explained me his work around the Habitable Worlds Observatory, that this was supposed to find exoplanets with life. And, we kind of got deep in the conversation. And over a few months, I was trying to, meeting him often, trying to understand the technology more, and where his mind is. And at some point, we just decided, hey, this is what I was looking for. So I spent my career in AI, and I was looking for the next big thing that really changes the AI hardware space, especially in visual AI. And that seems that is exactly what we should be doing. So once it clicked in my head, Saikat and I decided to do the DARPA SBIR, which started the whole thing. So Christine did her PhD at the same year as Saikat. So she was at Harvard, he was at MIT. And then she went on, so she was at EPFL and in Germany, in Munich. So we overlapped a little bit in Europe too, as we were both in Europe for a while. And when I had a common friend with Christine from the same lab. And when I went on LinkedIn to find people that had this particular intersection of skill sets, there was about 10 people in the world, and Christine was on the top. And I got introduced then through my common friend, talked to Christine, explained her the tech. She came over to the lab, met with Saikat many times. We met many times together, started it a bit early, and then locked it down and kicked off the company. There was like February where she officially joined. And then Mark had co-founded Kepler Communications. That's one of the largest companies in space companies in Canada. They had raised about 250 million or so. he had exited. He was our judge at the MIT Engine, which is an accelerator. And then he liked it so much that, he started advising us. And then as we kept working through it, after a few months, he joined us as a VP of product. So that's how that team all came together. And then below, the engineering team started a couple months ago, but they all have this very particular expertise in their domain. Like Ali is a fantastic researcher and engineer from the diffractive optics. Zhang is very experienced in scaling things from smaller to medium and then to large batches. And Abdelali actually did his PhD citing SciCat. So actually he knew about his work and had followed him in different conferences and so on for a long time. So he was a slam dunk too. So that's how the whole team came together.
It's really good because, again, early stage investing, you're really investing in the tech and the team, right? So it's understanding that background, etc.
Totally. Yeah.
Absolutely. Super interesting. So let's kind of finish it off so it's a complete, and then let's get you back to Thanksgiving party. Otherwise, we'll be taking up too much of your day. So let's talk through the business model side, right? Go on. Where does this play?
Yeah, so the business model at the end of the day is about data and the platform. So the camera itself that I spend now a lot of time explaining is actually just the enabler. But the main thing is that the camera is ours, and different satellite providers can host Galileo in their systems, or we basically get our own systems. But we have satellites in orbit with the camera. We get the data, and the data is now distributed to end customers. Both, it's a kind of hybrid model, which is very typical. So either through Sky-Fi, which we have a partnership with, so you have this platform, the data flows through, or you have below it like direct access through our platform, like a white label platform where especially defense customers can get access to the satellites and to the models. But ultimately what they're all paying for is the data, not the camera itself. And yeah, the launch that we have, so 27, 28, 29. So 27, the first launch of space domain, 28, first Earth observation launch. And then 29 onwards, we'll be able to do payloads, so give you the camera for other payloads, for example, for drone. And so far, how we have been going about is, so we started, as mentioned, with the SBIR. The funding, so we now had about a bit over 3.5 million in saves, including now from last week, obviously, from Slush, General Catalyst, and Cherry that joined us. The first check, interestingly, was written by Quantum Delta NL when Chad Righetti. So Chad Righetti did Righetti Quantum Computing. He was the first quantum company that IPO'd. So it was he knew SciCat, we got connected, and he was quick to write the first check. And interestingly, we thought this is what better first check than the guy who IPO'd the first quantum company, right? And can see 15 years ahead of his time. So that's an amazing relationship. On the customer side, so we work with the Air Force. So we have a demo with them in one of their space observatories. We just had the demo last week at the Space Force. That's the Apollo accelerator, where it's a really great ecosystem there of directly interacting with the Space Force, the Guardians, and being able to get direct feedback on your solution, even while you're building it before you go into like full development. So that's been a fantastic relationship. With SOCOM, we have a CRADA. So obviously they're interested in different use cases like Earth observation. With Sky-Fi, we have a partnership. Yeah, and we won a few competitions, obviously Slush last week. Before that, we won the Best Space Innovation of the Year at Tech Connect, Best Startup at the CDL Quantum, the Creative Destruction Lab. Yeah, we worked with NVIDIA in the Inception program, and we were at Mass Challenge and the Engine. But more importantly, now we are executing on a larger research contract pipeline, which is coming in mostly from Space Force, Air Force, DOW, and then, of course, also NATO partners. Yeah, so that's I guess, just to wrap up those two parts.
That was fantastic. And also, that was the kind of long version of the Slush pitch in a lot more detail.
Extra long version, yeah. If I had
you had
1 hour and 10 minutes.
You had an audience. Yeah, you had an audience that was engaged, so don't worry on that side. So look, big thanks for doing that. That was super cool, right? And again,
thank you.
Half the time when I'm chatting to founders, I'm like, okay, what does your brand actually say? Sounds really silly, but like, what's the name of your company? And is there something clever inside that makes me remember it? Then it's
Yeah.
like, what is the one thing that you're really optimized for, right? And then everything else falls from that kind of one thing. And obviously in yours, it's a kind of 1.5, which is that if you want someone to, you meet somebody at a party, it's like, yeah, we see further and we think faster. Right? But without the see further, the think faster makes no sense.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that is very important, because you're then going, but where does seeing further and thinking faster make the most sense?
Yeah.
Right? Where does this suddenly become a superpower where you force, as I said earlier, you force a choice, not a comparison. You shouldn't be on the same page as, you can clock this drone 130 meters away, or actually it's X kilometers away.
Yeah.
Excellent. Really, really good. Fantastic. I can see why you won Slush. What did you think? Any last questions before we kind of go for what was a 35-minute recording becomes an hour?
I loved it. And the fact that Johannes, which is now back, answered my questions without me asking is always a good sign. Although I do have on my wish list that maybe one day I'll have a conversation with Christine about calibration. It's one of my pet topics.
Okay, she would love that.
But it was great. I really loved it, Johannes. But really enjoyed the extended version.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, and Johannes, let's just then finish.
It's the same thing, just more fog.
Of course, yeah. Let's just finish, and we'll just cut this bit in, but let's just finish off with the who do you admire? So who do you think is doing some interesting work in this kind of area? Who, as a fellow founder, as an investor, who's kind of lit you up?
Yeah. I mean, when you initially said, who do you admire? I have a few people who did did fundamental breakthroughs and thought completely out of the box. So that's, you have like people like Richard Feynman was the first guy I thought about, to be honest. So, but because he had the first thought process of like, hey, nature is quantum mechanical and you should process it quantum mechanically and not analog, not digitally. And that's kind of gave birth to quantum mechanics, to the quantum computers and quantum information theory. And that kind of gave birth ultimately to diffraction. And so I really liked him thinking that way and establishing that. And maybe from kind of founder, more as somebody who's still alive and kicking today, I really like Tony Fadell. Like he had this book built. And actually, when I read his book a few years ago, it was one of the big turning points of me saying, okay, I wanted to break away from the corporate like entrepreneurship into proper 0 to a billion. So yeah, his story is very inspiring of the way how he thinks about the world and builds.
Yeah, and look, I think I think that book is great build. I'd strongly recommend. I recommend that one and Fall in Love with the Problem.
Yes.
By Ari. Sorry, I can't remember his surname. The co-founder of Waze. Very often, because again, it's almost like you should take a long time to fall in love with the problem. Tony Fadell spent like 10 years obsessing about his bloody thermostat in his in his kind of right, because it was freezing when but he spent 10 years not solving that problem really until he decided to really jump into that company. And look, it's not I'm not being mean, but like when someone comes over to me and says, okay, we're doing this AI vibe coding thing, or we're doing this AI thing. And I say, okay, cool. When did you get into AI? And they're like, yeah, when ChatGPT launched. I'm like, really? So if I talk to you about AlexNet and machine learning and all this sort of stuff, you have no idea, because your history point started there. When this new thing. And again, it's kind of like you're looking for founders who have deep domain passion. Right. And actually, there's almost been either a reworking of the paradigm in your case, or the technology has suddenly caught up in order for you to then solve the problem. The people had just accepted it as an it is what it is problem. Right. That's a limit of our vision. Tough, mate, if you want to go further than that. And so I love it when you kind of rework that area to make it something that is now, okay, the surface area of what we can do has now expanded. Absolutely. And then I capture that value. No, it was really good. Really good.
Back to the maybe last year, I keep putting in anecdotes, but I keep saying, in the context of my first interaction with AI I was a chess player in Crete. So I grew up in this, small island in Ios Nikolaos in the east of Crete. And I was competitive. I was 8 years old, I wasn't there, but I was playing, for championships. And then our chess instructor came and said, you know what, today we have to watch this video of Garry Kasparov versus Deep Blue at IBM. And then he got completely basically obliterated, right, by Deep Blue. And I was 8 years old. I was like, oh my God, I just got replaced by AI, right? And funny enough, that kind of kicked off that whole history, like story of me, even undergrad, grad research, doing AI, interestingly, initially for board games that then became research that went into like AlphaGo, then AlphaFold, and then interestingly just won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. So that trajectory came kind of early and unexpected into it, but I guess that's as far back as it goes.
And I think that's fantastic, because again, that's like, where were you when X happened? And then it's that high leverage point on a young mind. And it's like, oh, we suddenly see the world in a different light, meet a person who's done a particular job that you've never thought of, and okay, that job exists. Maybe I can go off and do that. Now, look, Johannes, this has been amazing. Thank you very much for joining the podcast. That was really, really good. We will let you get back to your Thanksgiving dinner.
Absolutely, will do. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. It was great meeting you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. To make sure you catch us again, please follow us on your favorite podcasting platform.